Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing well today. This time we are going to be talking about 10 NES games that are great for Halloween. I was mostly looking at atmosphere for these, so they need to be a little spooky or give you kind of a scary feeling when you play them. Some of these are not going to be good, some of them are going to be good games. Anyway, let's get into the list, and yeah, here we go. Castlevania II is a game that gets just an undeserving amount of crap from some people, mostly because of AVGN, and mostly because of the character that James Rolfe is playing. That being said, it is a very good game. It's confusing as shit, but it's a very good game, and it's got an excellent atmosphere to it, and that's something that all of the Castlevania games have. This is the one that I think gives you the most kind of scariness, just because of what you need to do and the sort of non-linear way that you need to go through the game. You need to look around a lot in order to find what you need to do. It can be very confusing. The enemies look good. The backgrounds and everything else look great. The game does have some flaws, but overall, it is a wonderful game to play for Halloween, just because of how spooky it is. So we go from something that I don't really like as much to something that I thoroughly enjoy, and that is Monster in My Pocket. This is one of the games that Konami got as a licensed property, and they really kind of knocked it out of the park with this one. You play as either Dracula or Frankenstein's monster, and you go around beating up some of the other Monsters in My Pocket figures. It is a rather spooky game because, well, you're fighting a bunch of monsters, and you're small enough to run around inside of someone's house. Whose house is it? I have really no idea. It might be explained in some of the comics or the unreleased TV show, but hey, it is a fun game. There's a lot of monsters in it, and it's a wonderful one to play for Halloween. There are certain things that always lend themselves really well to horror, and the classic monsters from the 1930s and 40s are always a great subject to go back to. Bandai did that with Frankenstein: The Monster Returns, where you basically do the same thing that you would do in Castlevania, but this time you are fighting Frankenstein's monster instead of Dracula. It's kind of weird. They flipped the roles of Frankenstein's monster and Dracula. So you fight Dracula second. You fight Dracula before you fight Frankenstein's monster. Anyway, this really is just like a Castlevania game, but just not as good. I mean that in all honesty. It's a fun game. It is very challenging, but it just kind of reminds you of wanting to play Castlevania because of how just sort of awkward everything is. But it is a fun game to play for October. To keep with our nice little theme of going with serious and comedy, let's go to Monster Party. This is a wonderful game. It's a little hard, but it is a very wonderful game. This takes a more comedic approach to everything, but somehow they were able to sneak a whole lot of gore and blood past the Nintendo censors. Especially when you come to a certain point and the world just goes crazy, and it looks really creepy. It is definitely one that I enjoy playing, especially for Halloween. Like a lot of games on this list, I'm pretty terrible at it, but it is a fun game to try to go through. There's a lot of comedy in it, despite just the absolute horrifying background that you're seeing here. Uninvited is a text adventure that was ported over to the NES. Well, I don't like this game that much on the NES. It is one of the games that has a great atmosphere to it. This is a horror game through and through, and if you can get past kind of the awkward controls and everything with the NES controller, it's a very fun experience. I would almost say go find this on an emulator somewhere, or go find it in some other way to play on the PC, because it is worth your time to check it out. There's a lot of creepiness to it. You come into some very scary scenes, which unfortunately got censored a little bit with the NES, but not that much. And it is a fun one to go and play if you're looking for some kind of a retro horror game. You might not think of Metroid when you think of horror games, but just imagine you're sitting back in front of your CRT late at night, you're running through this alien world, you're all by yourself, and you're kind of ill-equipped to deal with everything. That's the feeling that I get with Metroid. It's a very isolating game, and it's one that I think works really well to play for Halloween. It can be kind of scary at times, or at least it could have been back when I was little, especially when your health is low and the game starts beeping at you. It is one of those games that, you're going to feel like you're a rat in a maze, but hey, it's a lot of fun to play, no matter what time of the year, but especially for Halloween. If you're looking for something that's just insanely hard but has a great horror theme to it, it's definitely Ghosts and Goblins. This one was just, some of the games on this list were just easy to pick. Ghosts and Goblins was definitely one of them. It is a very, 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 very hard game, especially if you're not that great at platformers like me. But it is a great game to play. It's so much fun to go through and just try to figure out how to do everything. Thankfully, the game is incredibly generous with continues, so you're going to have plenty of chances to get through this one. It is a lot of fun if you can, deal with all of the difficulty spikes and everything like that. Okay, hear me out on this one. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, while not being a very good game, is one that has a great horror atmosphere. It does get kind of scary when you're playing as Dr. Jekyll, and you're just largely powerless to deal with what's going on around you. Also, you have to wonder why everything in the town wants you dead, but hey, that's for, someone else to really analyze. Then when you shift over to Mr. Hyde, that's when the game gets kind of fun, and it really does look like just an absolute nightmare to go through. It is a very fun game because you want to get through it, and it's more of a challenge to just see how far someone can really, deal with the game. What with its strange controls, bizarre attacks, and just the overall oddness of playing through it. So remember how I said not all of these are going to be good games? Well, I don't particularly like Ghoul School. That being said, it has everything that I would be looking for in a retro horror game. A bunch of creepy monsters, kind of a strange setting, one that feels familiar but is off in some way. You play as a character going through a school, dealing with just these strange creatures that have, kind of inhabited it. They don't really resemble ghouls, or at least what I think is a ghoul, but it is kind of a creepy game where you have to deal with a whole bunch of weird stuff going on and try to figure your way out of it. It's a very, very fun kind of a retro horror game. And now we come to the last one on the list, and that is Castlevania. It's just one of those things for me. You can't have a list of retro horror games for the NES and not include at least, one Castlevania, and in my case, 2 Castlevanias. Castlevania II, well, I think is a more effective-looking horror game, just has a better atmosphere and everything. The first Castlevania is just way better than that one. And it's one of those games that you can play and just really sit back and enjoy. You know exactly what you need to do, where you need to go, and it is a more fun experience than the second Castlevania. I also think it has a very similar atmosphere to Castlevania II. While it doesn't have the whole adventure and finding weird stuff, it is still a very fun game to play. And it's probably the one out of the original 3 that I would go back to the most. So that's going to wrap it up, everyone. Those were 10 retro horror games on the NES that I think are really great to play for Halloween or just the overall month of October. The NES isn't really known as, a horror game console, and a lot of those games sort of get overlooked, mostly because they're not really all that scary anymore, but many of them have kind of a creepy atmosphere to it. They try really hard to get you, and they were aiming at a much different audience than they are now. They were not going to be the survival horror of the PS1 or anything like that. They were trying to scare little kids. And I think they did that from time to time, because I remember being a little weirded out by some of them. So that'll wrap things up. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will talk to you all later. Bye.